You've probably heard the story since you were a child. The garden, the man, the woman, and the rib. It's one of the most famous moments in all of Scripture, God putting Adam into a deep sleep, reaching into his side, and forming Eve. And for as long as most of us can remember, we've pictured it exactly as the Sunday school flannel board showed it. God reaching for a single rib, pulling it out, and shaping it into the first woman. It's a tidy image. Simple, easy to teach. And yet, what if that picture we've carried all these years isn't the whole truth? What if, hidden in the Hebrew, in the very word God chose to describe this moment, there's something far deeper and far more beautiful than we've been told? Because here's the thing, the Hebrew word used in Genesis 2 for what God took from Adam is tsela, and in almost every other place that word appears in the Bible. It doesn't mean rib at all. No, tsela means side, like the side of the ark Noah built, like the side of the temple Solomon raised, like the side of the tabernacle where God's presence dwelled. Do you feel it? That shift? This isn't about God taking one small bone from Adam. This is about God opening Adam's very side, his whole structure, and from it building something sacred. And the more you think about it, the more the pieces start to move. Because if Eve was formed from Adam's side, it means she wasn't created from a leftover part, some spare rib from the workshop of creation. She was made from his very essence, the same stuff, the same strength, the same design. And here's where it gets even more interesting. The word Genesis uses for what God did next, built, is banah in Hebrew. It's not the word you'd expect if you were talking about forming a lump of clay or carving something from wood. Banah is the word used for constructing cities, for raising altars, for building the temple itself. Think about that. The first woman wasn't just made. She was built, carefully, intentionally, like a master architect setting every beam in place. So why? Why would such a powerful image get reduced to something as small as a rib? Why would the original picture of equality, unity, and shared purpose be replaced with something that, for centuries, has been used to keep one above the other? It's here that the story starts to sting. Because history tells us we've sometimes been more comfortable with hierarchy than with harmony. More comfortable saying woman came from man than admitting woman is half of man's very self. But go back to the garden, and the Hebrew refuses to let us stay there. It keeps whispering, no. They were two halves of one whole, two sides of one image, bone of the same bone, flesh of the same flesh. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. The moment you hear tsela as side instead of rib, the whole scene changes. It's no longer about a man standing above or a woman kneeling below. It's about two standing face to face, heart to heart, each reflecting God in a way the other cannot. It's not a romanticized Hallmark moment. It's the foundation of human identity. Because from the very beginning, before sin, before blame, before the first crack in the human story, God made man and woman to walk side by side. And here's the part that still gets me. In the New Testament, when John tells us about the crucifixion, he includes this detail. A soldier pierces Jesus' side, and from that wound flow blood and water, the birth of the church. Side, beginning, covenant. It's almost as if God is telling the story twice. Once in Eden, once on Calvary. Both times, life flows from the side. Both times, something new and sacred is born. Now, I don't know about you, but when I first saw that connection, I sat in silence. Because suddenly, this isn't just about Eve. It's about all of us. It's about how God builds unity, how He crafts relationship, and how easily we can lose sight of the original blueprint. And maybe it's time we looked at the blueprint again. Imagine if we did. Imagine if every marriage, every friendship, every partnership started with this image. Not one above, not one below, but side by side. Imagine how it could change the way we speak to each other, the way we listen, the way we lead. That's why I'm telling you this story. Not to be clever with Hebrew words, not to be different for the sake of it, but because sometimes the truth gets buried under centuries of habit. And when you dust it off, when you hold it up to the light, it can change everything. Now, before we go deeper, before we walk back into Eden and really see what happened that day, I want to ask you for something. If you're feeling that spark right now, if something in you is saying, wait, this is different, this is important, then stay with me. Hit that like button. Not just so the algorithm smiles on us, but because it tells me this matters to you. Drop a comment. I want to hear your thoughts, your questions, even your pushback. And if you haven't yet, make sure you follow this channel. Because what we're uncovering here is just the beginning. There are layers to the Bible that can take your breath away if you know where to look, and together we're going to look. So, take a deep breath. Picture the garden, the light just breaking through the trees. Adam, asleep in the grass. God, leaning close, beginning the first surgery in history. And from that opening, a side is taken, a masterpiece is built, and the world will never be the same. That's the tsela story. And it's only the first page of what we're about to discover. It's funny how one small word can change the way you see the whole world. For most of us, the story of Eve's creation has always sounded like this. God reaches into Adam, takes out a rib, and from that rib shapes the first woman. End of scene. We've heard it so many times, we don't even stop to ask questions, we just accept it. Rib, bone, done. But what if that's not what the story was really saying? What if right there in the Hebrew, in the original language of the text, the word isn't rib at all? What if it's side? Now, side might not sound like much at first, but give it a second. Let it sink in. If Eve came from Adam's side, that's a whole different picture. It's not a little bone plucked out while Adam's in a divine nap. It's half his frame, his other half, his mirror, his equal. See, when you hear rib, you picture something small, something extra, something you could technically live without. You break a rib, it hurts, but you can still function, and over time, that image has done something to us. It's made it easy to think of Eve, and by extension, every woman, as a smaller secondary piece of the story. A helper, yes, but maybe not as strong, not as central, not as complete. But side, that's different. Side says, you can't stand without me. Side says, we're built together. Side says, I'm not behind you or in front of you, I'm beside you. And you can almost hear God saying it too. This is how I want it. This is the blueprint. Not one over the other, not one carrying all the weight, but two image bearers, each carrying a piece of me, walking the garden side by side. It's such a different vision from the way history often played out. Let's be honest, humans have had a long history of turning side-by-side relationships into top and bottom ones. The story of the rib has been used, sometimes quietly, sometimes loudly, to justify that shift. See? She came from a small part of him. See? She's dependent on him to exist. But that's not what Genesis was saying. If anything, the side language pushes the exact opposite idea, that they were created interdependent. One wasn't the spare part of the other, one wasn't the upgrade or the afterthought. Together, they were the whole picture. Think about how that plays out in real life. When you're walking with someone you truly value, you don't put them behind you like they're a follower. You don't march ahead and expect them to keep up. And you don't lag behind like you're dragging your feet. You walk together, shoulder to shoulder, same pace, same direction, same goal. That's the image here, and it's no accident that God chose tsela, a word that shows up when describing the sides of sacred structures. The side of the ark that carried life through the flood. The side of the tabernacle where His presence dwelled. The side of the temple that stood as the heart of worship for generations. Every time the Bible talks about a side in that way, it's talking about something foundational, something you can't take away without the whole thing collapsing. So when God takes Adam's side, he's not doing a quick patch job. He's taking something essential. And when he builds Eve from it, he's not making a copy or a lesser version. He's creating a counterpart, a partner in purpose, someone who reflects his image in ways Adam never could on his own. And here's the part that makes it even more powerful. The first words Adam speaks when he sees Eve aren't, "Oh, you're from my rib." They're poetry. This is now bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. Not a part of me, the same life, the same being, the same value. That's what sacred partnership looks like. Not sameness, because they're clearly different, but equality. Unity. Two voices in harmony. Two reflections of God's image walking in sync. Now, pause for a second and think about what it would mean if we actually lived like that was true. If every relationship, marriages, friendships, work partnerships, started from this understanding. We are sides, not rungs on a ladder. What would change? Maybe the conversations would be different. Maybe respect wouldn't be something earned after years of proving yourself, but something given freely because it was built into the blueprint from day one. Maybe leadership wouldn't be about who gets to call the shots, but about how two people can carry the weight together without either one breaking. And here's where it gets even more personal for us today. When Jesus came, he didn't ignore this design. He restored it. He tore down the hierarchies humans had built and said, "In my kingdom, you serve one another. You lift each other up. You lay down your life for your friends." And remember that detail from the cross? The soldier pierces his side. Blood and water flow. The birth of the church. It's like God was telling the creation story again, only this time he wasn't building Eve from Adam's side. He was building his bride, the church, from his own. Side, unity, covenant. It's all the same language, and maybe that's the point. Maybe God keeps using the side because he wants us to remember something we keep forgetting. Life comes from partnership, from equality, from walking together. It's not always easy. Let's be honest, side-by-side living can be messy. It means listening when you'd rather talk. It means compromising when you're sure your way is better. It means seeing the other person's worth even when you're not feeling particularly generous. But it's worth it. Because when you live this way, you're living the way God intended from the very beginning. You're refusing to settle for the small, broken image of rib and stepping back into the wide, beautiful truth of side. And I think that's why this matters so much today. We live in a world that's quick to divide, quick to put people above or below, to measure worth by titles or power or status. The garden story calls us back to something older, something truer. It whispers, "No, you were made to stand together." So maybe the invitation is simple. Stop living like you're just a rib. Stop treating the people in your life like they're expendable or replaceable. See them for what they are, the other side of something God calls good. Because in the end, this isn't just a detail in a Hebrew dictionary. It's a picture of God's heart, a reminder that the best things he builds from the side, and once you see it, you can't go back to the old picture. You don't want to. Because this one, the side picture, is so much more whole, so much more human, and so much more like him. They could have said, God took a rib and made a woman. And for thousands of years, that's exactly what we thought the text said. But in the ancient Hebrew, there's a word sitting quietly in Genesis 2 that refuses to be ignored. It's not a word you use when you're talking about carving or shaping. It's not a word for fashioning something out of spare parts. It's banah, to build. When the Hebrew writer tells us that God built the woman from the side of the man, it isn't just a casual choice. Banah is the same word you'd use if you were talking about building an altar, a house, or even the temple itself. It's a construction term, the kind of word that makes you picture foundations being set, pillars rising, walls fitted with precision. And in the ancient world, building wasn't just functional, it was sacred. Every stone was placed with care. every joint was measured. You built something because it mattered. This means Eve's arrival in the story isn't some afterthought. She isn't an accessory tacked onto the end of creation, like a final decoration on a finished project. No, she is the project. She is the grand reveal. She is the part of the plan that God saves for last because she's that important. And when you hear that word banah, you begin to see the moment differently. It's not a quick flick of divine power. It's intentional, deliberate, thought through, like an artist stepping back before the final brushstroke, like an architect who has drawn up every line before laying a single stone. God built her, and if He built her, it means she was meant to stand. She was meant to endure. She was meant to carry weight, not as a burden, but as strength. In the ancient Hebrew imagination, anything worth building had purpose. The ark was built to save. The altar was built to worship. The temple was built to host the very presence of God. And in that same sacred category, the woman was built to reflect His image, to walk beside the man, to carry life itself in her body and wisdom in her soul. Think about that. From the first breath she took, she wasn't just another human. She was a living sanctuary, the place where life could begin, grow, and flourish, not just in childbirth, though that too is holy, but in every way her presence shaped the world. She could build a home out of nothing. She could build hope where there was despair. She could build peace in the middle of chaos. She was built to build. And I wonder, how different would history have been if we had remembered that? If we had taught our daughters that they were built with the same intentionality as the temple? If we had taught our sons that the woman beside him was not a spare rib, but a co-builder of God's kingdom? If we had told the story the way the Hebrew actually tells it, because banah doesn't speak of accident. It doesn't speak of plan B. It speaks of skill, design, and purpose from the beginning. It tells us that when God looked at Adam and said, "It is not good for man to be alone," He wasn't just filling a gap. He was unveiling the other half of the blueprint. You can feel the shift, can't you? Instead of imagining God plucking out a rib like a part from a shelf, you picture Him as a master builder, lifting Adam's side, laying a foundation, setting walls that fit seamlessly. Not something less than, but something equal to. Not taken from His head to rule over him, not taken from His feet to be trampled under him, taken from His side, because she was built to stand beside Him. That's not just poetry, that's structure. That's the way the building is meant to stand. And when the structure stands as God designed, it holds, it weathers storms, it bears weight without crumbling. But here's the tragedy. For centuries, the language got lost. We shrank banah into a soft, fragile word, as if God had simply fashioned something delicate. We forgot the craftsmanship. We forgot the strength. And somewhere along the way, the story of her intentional design became a story of her supposed inferiority. That's not the story the Hebrew tells. In the original language, banah screams of purpose. It reminds us that she was never meant to be a background character in Adam's life, but an equal image-bearer, built from the same stuff, sharing the same calling. The building couldn't be complete without her, and Adam knew it, because when he saw her for the first time, he didn't call her helper or assistant. He said, "Bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh." In other words, you are me, I am you. We are the same structure. And maybe this is where it hits home for us today. In a world that still tries to tell women they're less than, that their role is secondary, that they're supporting cast to someone else's story, the ancient Hebrew refuses to agree. It keeps pointing back to that construction site in Eden, where God Himself was the builder and the woman was the masterpiece He was unveiling. You see, when something is built, it's meant to last. You don't build something sacred to tear it down. You don't build a temple just to abandon it, and you don't build a woman in God's own image just to sideline her. Her value was set in stone the moment God chose banah over every other word He could have used. And maybe, just maybe, the reason we're rediscovering this now is because God is restoring the original blueprint. He's reminding us that the partnership between man and woman was always meant to be side by side, equal in worth, equal in calling, different in role, perhaps, but never in value. Because the building only stands when both sides hold. So when you hear Genesis 2 again, I hope you can picture it. God bending over Adam's side, his hand shaping something with patience and care, not rushing, not improvising, but building with the same attention he gave the stars, the mountains, and the oceans. And when he was done, he didn't just bring her to Adam, he presented her, like a builder unveiling the crown jewel of his work. That's the power of banah. It changes the way you see her. It changes the way you see yourself. And it changes the way you see the God who builds with love, not just power. For centuries, the story most of us heard growing up went something like this. God made Adam first, then, almost like a side note, he took a rib and made Eve. And just like that, the foundation was laid for a certain idea to quietly settle into culture. That men came first, that women came second, and maybe that's the way the world was meant to be. We don't say it out loud in Sunday school. We don't write it on church bulletins. But it's there, woven into sermons, traditions, even jokes. The rib story became shorthand for a hierarchy. And when you grow up hearing something over and over, you stop questioning it. You accept it. You pass it on, until it becomes part of the furniture of your faith, something you don't even notice anymore. And maybe that's exactly how misunderstanding survives. But here's where it gets interesting. If you take a closer look, not at the English Bible you've known your whole life, but at the Hebrew text the ancient authors actually wrote, you notice something subtle. The word tsela, that little Hebrew word that's been translated rib for generations, doesn't actually mean rib in most of the Bible. In fact, almost everywhere else it appears, it means side, not a bone, not a fragment, a whole side, a part that's foundational, structural, essential. And suddenly, the story starts to shift. Because if Eve was made from Adam's side and not just his rib, then she's not just a smaller piece carved from him. She's half of him. She's not an accessory. She's the other part of a whole. And if that's true, the entire mental picture changes. This isn't about God making a helper in the modern sense of the word, like an assistant. This is about God restoring what was incomplete, building unity, not hierarchy. But somewhere along the way, language got simplified. And when language simplifies, meaning can shrink. The side became a rib. The rib became a symbol of something smaller, more delicate, maybe even secondary. And the more that translation was repeated, the more it was preached, the more it seeped into theology. And theology shapes culture. And culture shapes how men and women see each other and themselves. The result? Centuries of sermons, commentaries, and traditions quietly reinforcing a ladder, with men on the top rung, women a step below, and everyone assuming that's just the way God made it. But what if it's not? Because when you go back to that moment in Eden, before the fall, before sin warped human relationships, you don't see Adam towering over Eve. You see two people standing side by side, made in the image of God, equal in worth, different in design, united in purpose. And that original design wasn't just poetic, it was divine architecture. Co-rule, co-stewardship, harmony. And if you look at the rest of Scripture with that lens, you notice something beautiful. The God of the Bible never created hierarchy between man and woman. Sin did. Genesis 3 is where domination and mistrust enter the scene. But Genesis 2? That's pure partnership. That's the blueprint. So the tragedy is not just that we've misunderstood a Hebrew word, it's that we've built entire systems on the mistranslation. Systems that told little girls to dream smaller, that kept women out of pulpits, that made some marriages more about control than about love. And the tragedy deepens when you realize how much beauty we've missed. Because if you believe Eve came from Adam's side, it paints a different kind of intimacy. Side by side, they walk. Side by side, they tend the garden. Side by side, they face the world. That's the image God intended for humanity, male and female reflecting His image together. When Jesus came, He didn't just save souls, He restored God's vision for human relationships. Look at how He treated women, sitting with them, teaching them, defending them in public, trusting them with the news of His resurrection before anyone else. That's not accidental. That's Eden leaking into the New Testament. That's the side-by-side design being lived out in real time. And maybe that's why this matters so much now. Because in our modern world, even with all the progress we've made, that old rib story still lingers. It still shapes subtle assumptions in churches, in homes, in workplaces. But when we uncover the truth, when we go back to what the Hebrew actually says, we find a God who never intended for one half of His image to be treated as less. That's not just good theology, that's good news. So if this is hitting you the way it hit me, maybe it's time to start some conversations. Maybe it's time to go back to the beginning and let the real story reshape how we see each other. Because once you see Eve for who she really is, not a rib, not a lesser, but the other half of humanity's very first covenant, you can't unsee it. And maybe, just maybe, that's the point. If you've been tracking with me this far, I'd love for you to help spread this truth. Hit that like button so more people can find it. Drop a comment and tell me what you think, whether you've heard this before, whether it challenges you, whether it gives you hope. And if you want more deep dives like this, stories that pull back the curtain on what the Bible really says, go ahead and subscribe. This is just the beginning. Because sometimes the smallest word can change the biggest story. And this one changes everything. You're sitting in a quiet study somewhere in Jerusalem, shelves lined with ancient scrolls, the smell of leather and ink in the air. You pull down a commentary that's older than the country you live in, older than the languages we speak. You run your finger along lines written by rabbis who poured their lives into studying the Torah. And you notice something. They didn't see Eve as some lesser creation. They didn't see her as a supporting character in Adam's story. In fact, some rabbinic commentary paints her as an equal partner, someone who stood beside Adam in God's garden, sharing the same divine calling. The Talmud, those volumes of Jewish thought that wrestle with Scripture, like Jacob wrestling with the angel, also preserves this vision. It speaks of the man and the woman as sharing dignity, both bearing the image of God. You start to realize this idea of equality isn't some modern invention. It's ancient. It's baked into the Hebrew story from the very beginning. Somewhere along the way, the translation rib blurred the picture, but the heart of the story never changed. And then you step into the New Testament. If Genesis 2 is the blueprint, the Gospels are the living example. Watch how Jesus moves. He doesn't just walk through Galilee teaching men while women watch from the sidelines. He invites women into the conversation. He lets Mary sit at His feet, the place of a disciple, in a culture where that was almost unthinkable. He speaks openly with the Samaritan woman at the well, breaking not just one, but 2 social taboos. He allows a woman to anoint His feet with perfume and tears, and instead of shaming her, He honors her before everyone in the room. And then there's the resurrection morning. If you wanted to make a cultural statement about equality in the first century, this was it. The first witnesses to the empty tomb weren't Peter, James, or John. They were women. Jesus didn't just trust them with the news, He trusted them with the most important news in history. That's not an accident. That's intentional. The Apostle Paul, often misunderstood himself, actually echoes this vision when he writes that in Christ there is neither male nor female, Jew nor Gentile, slave nor free. He's not saying our differences vanish. He's saying the hierarchy dies at the cross. The playing field is level in the kingdom of God. And if you weave all of this together, the rabbinic insights, the Talmud's affirmations, the Gospel's examples, the early church's teachings, you start to see a seamless story. God's original design in Eden wasn't lost forever in Genesis 3. It was preserved, whispered through the prophets, protected in Jewish tradition, and then embodied in the life of Jesus. It's a story of restoration, not of flipping the hierarchy, not of replacing one form of dominance with another, but of returning to that first garden moment, man and woman side by side, each one a reflection of the Creator, each one carrying equal worth, each one called to steward life together. And here's the thing. This matters just as much today as it did back then. Because in our world, the pull toward imbalance is still strong. It sneaks into boardrooms, pulpits, dinner tables, and policies. But the biblical story calls us higher. It challenges us to stop measuring worth by position or title and start seeing people, every person, the way God does. That's not just theology. That's how you change a culture. So maybe this is the part of the story where you and I step in. We have the choice to live like Eden is still God's blueprint, to honor each other, not out of politeness, but because that's the way the universe was meant to work from the beginning. And the more we live that way, in our marriages, our friendships, our communities, the more we become living reminders of the truth Adam saw when he first looked at Eve. Bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. Equal, whole, made to walk side by side. If this resonates with you, if you can feel that tug to go back to the beginning, then don't keep it to yourself. Hit that like button so the message spreads. Share it with someone who needs to hear that the Bible's real story is bigger, bolder, and better than they've been told. Drop a comment and tell me what part of this hit home for you. And if you want to keep uncovering the truths that tradition sometimes hides, subscribe and stick around, because the deeper you go, the more you'll see. God's story was never about one half of humanity being above the other. It's about two halves, made in His image, standing together in the light. And that is a story worth living. All right, let's bring this home. If you strip away the centuries of mistranslation, the debates, the theological dust that's settled on this story, what you're left with is something so simple it almost feels too good to be true. A man, a woman, both made in the image of God, both built for the same garden, the same mission, the same joy. Not copies of each other, not competing with each other, but complementing, completing, and calling out the best in one another. That's the Edenic vision. Not a hierarchy, not a tug of war, but a dance. Two sides of one creation moving in step, each dependent on the other, each thriving because the other thrives. When God pulled that tsela from Adam, He wasn't making a spare part. He was revealing that the fullness of His image takes both male and female standing together. And here's where it gets real. We're not in Eden anymore. We live in a world with broken trust, bruised relationships, power games, and centuries of imbalance. And if we're honest, restoring this vision won't be easy. It means unlearning a lot of what we've been told, sometimes even from people in places we love. It means men choosing to see women not as competition or as someone to lead from a distance, but as co-heirs of God's kingdom. It means women stepping fully into their God-given authority without fear or apology, not to overpower men, but to walk beside them as they were meant to. The truth is, unity is harder than hierarchy. Hierarchy is clean, predictable, and lets one person call the shots. Unity requires humility. It requires listening. It requires us to admit we need the other half. But here's the thing. When we choose it, when we step into that side-by-side design, something of Eden leaks back into the world. And maybe that's the point. Maybe God's not asking us to recreate the garden perfectly right now. Maybe He's asking us to plant little pieces of it wherever we go, in the way a husband and wife treat each other, in how friendships cross gender lines with respect and care, in churches where women's voices aren't just tolerated, but treasured, in workplaces where collaboration is valued over control. I think about how the story ends in Revelation, not with humanity going back to Eden, but with a city coming down from heaven, a place where God lives with his people again. And in that place, there's no curse, no battle of the sexes, no invisible walls, just the wholeness he intended from the start. That tells me the Edenic vision isn't some relic of the past, it's a preview of the future. So here's my challenge, and it's as much to myself as it is to you. Don't wait for heaven to start living like heaven. Live like Eden was the plan, because it still is. Refuse the easy road of imbalance. Choose the harder, holier road of partnership. Call out the image of God in each other until the world starts to notice there's something different about the way you love, lead, and live. And before you click away, I want you to do 3 things, because if we're going to rebuild this vision together, it's going to take all of us. First, hit that like button. It's a simple act, but it tells the algorithms this message matters and needs to be heard. Second, drop a comment. I want to hear your thoughts. Where have you seen this side-by-side vision lived out? Where have you struggled to find it? Your stories might just be the encouragement someone else needs. And third, subscribe and stay connected. This is just one piece of a much bigger journey we're on together. Because this story, it's not over. The creation account in Genesis isn't just ancient history. It's a mirror, a map, and a mission. And every time you choose unity over control, partnership over pride, love over fear, you take one more step back toward the garden gates. And maybe, just maybe, if enough of us start walking that way, we'll hear the sound of Eden's rivers again. We'll see the tree of life on the horizon. And we'll remember that we were never meant to live any other way.